Hello, I'm Daniela. In today's video, I'm going to show you a fun technique. I call it the corset stitch. It's not really a stitch, an embroidery stitch. It's just a way to stitch in your work to add an element that resembles, well, a corset. A corset is that old-time undergarment that women would wear to cinch their waists to make them look really thin. The idea with a corset is it's designed to form-fit your body, and then you could pull it even tighter to give you a tiny waist and so on. We're not going to worry about that today, but we are going to take inspiration from the lacing of a corset, the way it zigs and zags, kind of like you're tying your shoe. I just think calling it a corset stitch is a little racy, but a little fun as well. It's kind of romantic, the idea of it. So I'll show you how to do it, and I'll give you a bunch of examples of how I used it in my work, and little elements that you can add to make it just a little more fancy. So let's get started. So this is what I mean by the corset stitch. It brings two pieces together and it looks like it's being cinched. So there are different ways to do this. Because it reminds me of a corset though, I put in the lace to indicate that behind it. Now you made two little fabric strips here to make it look like the back of a dress. It was just very rustic, but it's a very interesting design. I have some other examples showing you how I use it. I created this one, which is a little more in depth and still a little more rustic. I think it's so cute to use, just that monotone color. It's just that beige, it's got the hints of the lace, the stitching, and the little strands here to imply that it's like a corset that gets tightened. And then I have a larger piece that would make a nice book page right here, along with the trim that I used here, and that corset stitch right at the top of the piece. You don't have to use it at the top. I just like that element. I stitched down my trim on a much larger scale. So let's start making one today. So to start with, I chose my lace for the backing. You don't have to use lace. I just like this effect. I think it just adds a little bit of femininity and elegance to the piece. I have my backing fabric and I have my little trim to make the sides here. This is just some ribbon. You can always use fabric as well, like I did in some of the designs. But I like the ribbon effect, and I chose to go with blue and white for this. I also have some additional lace here that I embellish it further when my piece is stitched together, so I'll set that aside. I have a pen here, Frixion pen, that I can use to make the markings, and then I have some blue 6 strands of embroidery floss and some other embroidery floss here to tack down the side pieces as well as to make the stitches. I also have some white thread to hold down the rest of the piece. So to get started, I want to create the size of the background. I'm just going to trim this down a little bit. I can always trim it further. And then I'll decide what size I want for the actual corset here. Since I'm using ribbon, I'll just cut one here and kind of go with it from there. I can make it long and narrow or wide. It's really up to you. And I kind of like the way it hangs off the piece. I also like tucking the ends under on one so it's a little finished at the base. So that's just something I'll do. I think I'll actually tuck the end under here up top as well, just to give the top a finished effect. And then I'll have my lace behind it. So I can decide if I want the ribbon to come off or to be underneath the lace. So those are some design elements to consider. Let's see, I'll kind of tack that down, feed that in. So roughly that's the size that I want that to be. So I'm just going to sketch here just on the inside so I have an idea of the size piece I want. And now I'm just going to trim around that, and I'll be really generous trimming around that because I know it's going to be easier to stitch down if I have a little bit of leeway. think think I'll actually pull that up quite high. And then play around with this part. I do like the way that makes a little V up top, the cut of that ribbon. And then to put that there, we'll just cut the bottom as well, kind of at a little angle. Just kind of now making my design so I can pin everything in place, getting the right size. So once I have that lace in place, I'll pin that down with one pin up top. And then I can move on here. And now I'm ready to start stitching. Now when I stitch this, I'm going to make sure it covers that ribbon on the back. So I'm going to take my embroidery floss here, and I have one strand of the blue embroidery floss because I just want to tack it down. So I'm going to start at the base here, making sure that my ribbon connects exactly as I want it. I might have to remove that pin and pull it down into place a little bit better. And I think I'm going to start just by stitching just a couple of basting stitches down to hold the end of this ribbon in place. So I have my one strand of embroidery floss. I'll just stitch a couple of stitches here. And then when I come to the other side of the ribbon, I just want to tack down the exterior of the ribbon, just whatever's on the perimeter. So I'll just make a couple of little stitches to hold that in place. And unlike the basting stitches that I used for the back side of the ribbon, the wrong side, I want these stitches to be neat and little. Working my way down. And now I'll slide this piece into position. These are just the little gymnastics you go through to make just a finished edge. Once I have that nicely in place, I'll take a moment and pin it down. And I'm quite happy with that. I'll just continue stitching around the outer perimeter of this ribbon V, just with these small little stitches. Go around the base, and it'll be a little tough on some of the areas where there's multiple layers of this ribbon. So I'll just continue patiently around. So now I stitched all the way around the perimeter here. You can see on the back how I did that. And I also stitched down the top here, just so I have that nice neat fold. Now if you open up this very carefully, you'll see that that white fabric, that lace, is not stitched down. So there are a couple of options here. You can take some white thread and just tack it down on the inside here, or you can take some of the one strand of blue and just lightly tack it down in certain areas. Now while I was stitching around here, I want to make sure that my fold is exposed and not the raw edge of that fabric. So I'm going to come in here first with some white thread just around the perimeter here, starting at the top, making small little stitches, and hold this white material in place, this lace. It doesn't require a lot of stitches, just enough to really hold it down. So I'm going to go around the perimeter of that, making my little stitches, and these stitches won't show. I'll go around the perimeter, and then I'm going to come up top here and just do a few little stitches to hold it in place. You can go through the folds of the ribbon if you want, that additional ribbon that I have, and then I'll just really anchor it into place. Or not. It's really what you want to do here. I can remove the pin. I'll knot off my white thread on the back here, and then I'm going to tack down that ribbon on the front. So I'll place my ribbon inside the fold here. Just flatten off that ribbon so it has a nice resting area. And I'm going to stitch down, coming from the back of the fabric all the way through the ribbon here, holding it down where it intersects. And then I'm just going to go up just a little bit of the ways, maybe 2 or 3 small little stitches to tack down the ribbon as we go up that little V. So I make a few little stitches here. This really helps hold down this ribbon in place. Don't want to do too many stitches, just enough to really anchor it. And again, I'm making these stitches small enough that they blend in with that background fabric. So this is starting to come along. I'll just stitch a knot here through my thread. And now we can start the actual corset stitch. So now to create the corset stitch, you can decide if you want a lot of stitches or a few stitches. I like to take my pen because I think this is an important part to make neat. And then maybe every centimeter, starting at that V, I'll mark out a little spot all the way up to the top here. So I'm just going to mark it on one side. And this is a marker that will erase with heat. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side. I'll just make sure that I start right at that intersection. That'll be the area where I start my measurement. I'm going to use the 9 here to hold it down. So now I have my marks on both sides of the V. Now there are a couple ways you can do this. I have 6 strands of embroidery floss and I'm choosing to use a blue thread. You can use whatever color you want. So now there are different ways to do this. The way I like to do this is to come up from the back of the fabric, and I'm starting here on the left hand side because I'm a righty, through all of my layers of fabric. And then I'm going to go across and up to the nearest mark that I made and come in from the bottom of that ribbon. I'm going to tilt my piece and go across and up. So I'm not going to go straight across, I'm just going to go across and up, and I'm going to go underneath that ribbon. And I pull it gently. I'm not trying to get it taut just yet. And then again, across and up, looking for that mark. It's right there. And then across and up and so on. And I'll do this the entire length of the piece. Again, just playing with the tension. And now when I come to the last part, I can decide if I want to have the string hang open, which I kind of like that effect. If you don't, you just stitch down through it. Because I don't want the string though to get lost, I'm going to stitch down through it anyway. I'm just going to gently pull my thread, making sure it's as taut as I want throughout my little piece here. And now I'm going to stitch right down through all the layers, nice and taut, and then I'll come back up very close to where I went down there. And I'll just remove my needle. I can trim this to whatever length I want, just like that. I'll take another strand of embroidery floss, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So I come up from the back of the fabric through all the layers, and then I just go up, and it's very easy now because I don't have to really worry where the stitches go. I just look for the empty little mark there, just avoiding the strand there and finishing it up. And it's starting to really come together. You can see it develop. It looks very pretty, like a ladder stitch almost. Then when I make my last stitch, I'll just come up. You can see that corset starting to form. Get the tension right, go down, and then come back up. I'll remove my needle and and cut the end of my little thread here. Just trim this down slightly. So that looks really cute. I can end it right there, or I can add more embellishments here. I can add a little lace to the bottom. I like to do that. Even though this is not a completed page, it's just something I can use in my book or in another piece of work. And now I just got to choose which lace I want to add to the end. I think I like this. I think I like this little heart lace. I'm going to make it extra long here so that I can trim it when I'm ready to use it finally in my work. Kind of just play around with it. I like the way it overhangs. I'll tack it in place, and then using my white thread, I'll just use a couching stitch to tack that down exactly where I want it. So there, I've stitched it down across the top. I can remove my pins, and then I have my finished piece. For now, I'm just going to tuck the ends over it. And I have a cute little corset stitched piece. So that's how I create the corset stitch to use in my work. There are a lot of elements to it. It's not just the lacing, but you could of course take those elements apart and use them in your work one by one if you'd like. I like the different parts that pull apart the seam, the lacing of the corset, and then of course the added lace embellishment to the top or bottom of the piece. I think it just makes it a little interesting. It's reminiscent of the old-time undergarment. That's very pretty as well. You can get a lot of variation using the colors or the non-colors in your work. I just particularly like that soft neutral palette. It's just something different to use. If you've enjoyed this video and want to see behind the scenes footage and access to a slow stitching library that's available only for members, please consider becoming a member of my channel. I'll include the link in the show notes. Thanks for joining me today. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe.